What if the love you needed wasn't absent, just unseen? What if your parents were loving you the only way they knew how, but it still didn't meet the emotional needs of your sensitive, intuitive, neurodivergent self? In today's episode, we're diving into the healing that happens when you stop waiting for a different past and start forgiving the one you had. Because forgiveness isn't about saying it was okay, it's about saying you're no longer carrying it. Keep listening. Welcome to the Inner Magic Academy podcast. If you're loving our videos, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks and enjoy this episode. Welcome, I'm your host Peter Magic. And if you grew up feeling emotionally invisible, misunderstood, or like the love you received came with conditions, this episode is for you. As someone navigating the world with autism and ADHD, I've had to make peace with the fact my parents didn't always know how to love the depth of who I am. But I've come to understand that they were loving me through the lens of their own wounds, conditioning, and limitations. And in this realization, something shifted. Today, I'll share the moment I stopped projecting resentment and started meeting my inner child with the love I'd been waiting for. The key themes we'll explore today are how conditional love impacts the nervous system and shapes identity, understanding your parents as wounded children in adult bodies, why emotional neglect hits neurodivergent kids harder, moving from projection and blame to clarity and empowerment, forgiveness not as approval but as a choice for peace, and how healing the parent wound reclaims your personal power. So the key question to today's podcast is, what would it mean to you if you stopped waiting for the love you never received and started giving it to yourself? Let's dive in. The first segment we're going to get into is the moment I realized my parents couldn't give me what I needed. So my story, I'm sure if you've been following this podcast that you've known a little bit more about my journey. So, growing up, I was abandoned by my father at a very young age, and my mum was a single parent. So I didn't, my stepfather didn't come into my life until I was around 13 years of age. So a lot of my identity, had already been formed. And, what I realized over the past 5 years, since I've gone through my spiritual awakening and gone down this steep path of healing and understanding, how my identity was formed from a very young age unconsciously, how my whole identity was built around the hurt and pain my 4-year-old self experienced through abandonment and, growing up being emotionally neglected by my mother. What I actually started to understand is, the moment I saw my mother, not as the source of my pain, but as the woman who never got the love she needed, what this actually triggered within me is, I started to look at my journey beyond not only myself, but beyond even my own mother's experience, because I heard her story. I've heard all about her life and all the things she went through at a time when I didn't even move through healing myself and I didn't even know myself. And so it was a lot for me to hear her journey when I never got to be seen and heard for the things that I went through and I was moving through. And at that time I wasn't ready. And I held a lot of anger and resentment towards my mother because my father was absent from my life. And so I would project a lot of this anger and this resentment onto my mother. And so, what this has actually triggered, it triggered a lifetime of feeling unseen and emotionally misunderstood. So I started to understand and see my mother beyond not only my own journey, but beyond her own journey, and seeing things from a generational perspective on just how, as children, how this affects us when our needs aren't met, and a lot of them, what we project outwardly is, this conditional love. And a lot of us, we experience the world differently in many different ways through our neurodivergence. And a lot of the time, we do feel misunderstood. We don't feel like other people taking the time to better know and understand our heart and hold space for us so we can express ourselves, so we can feel more seen, feel more heard, feel more safe, in the environments we're in and so forth. So, growing up, I felt the pressure of being the good child while my needs were unmet. So I would basically, you can say, parent my own mother whilst I was still, unhealed and carrying a lot of wounds and things. I was still there absorbing and listening to her whole story and her journey and everything she went through, when I never got the chance to, express how I was feeling, and I wasn't then ready to move down the path of healing. I was the good child. I would do whatever my mother wanted. I would listen to her in these moments where, she was intoxicated and sharing her journey over and over and over again on repeat, and all the struggles and all the things she went through. It was a lot for anyone to handle, but for someone who's neurodivergent and someone who didn't have the safe space to move through their own journey of healing, and because their needs were not being met, and they were never seen, they were never heard, they were never given that safe space to express themselves. This really, in this environment I grew up in, it triggered a lot of these things, and I was never able to process and move through all the things that I was never able to process and move through in the past. And understanding my inner child and their needs were not being met. And I held a lot of guilt from resenting, someone who was also deeply wounded. So when I moved down the path of healing and I started to see my mother beyond, just the experience that I went through, beyond even seeing her through her own journey, understanding her story. Like, when I started to take myself out of that situation, also take her out of that situation, I started to really see these patterns, these cycles that would play out. And, I would feel guilty for projecting a lot of that onto my mother over the years. And I understand that, that's my inner child hurting, and my inner child needing to express that hurt and that pain, and feeling misunderstood. And as an adult, when I was projecting from this place, it was really hard for me because, I've seen my mother, and I realized just how difficult it was for her to be a single parent, and going through a divorce and having to work multiple jobs just to support us and be the provider. And, she did whatever she needed to do to cope and to survive. And I started to see, she was also shut off from her emotional body, and based on her upbringing and all the things she went through, and being a single parent is so much for her to have to go through. And when you actually start to see that, we're all born into this world through conditional love, because we're born into a conditional environment, and it's shaped by many generations, this energetic imprint that continues to pass on to the, next generation. We carry this within our nervous system, within our DNA. And unless we consciously start to pull ourselves out of this situation and look at ourselves from a spiritual lens outside of what we're in, we're never going to be able to have the space to process and to move through and allow those parts and aspects of ourselves that didn't have their needs met to, have the safe space to start actually moving through, processing and healing through that. And so they don't continue to project from a place of this anger, this resentment, or, and also feel the guilt and the shame and all these sort of things from, what you project out onto your parents. Because when you actually start to see that, it's hard for anyone living in this world. But for a single parent, for example, a mother being a single parent, also carrying all those generations of wounds and things, and being disconnected from her own emotional body, and not knowing how to process and move through that herself. Like, how is she going to be able to hold the space for me when she's constantly in this world where she's chasing, and she's never able to have a moment of rest? How is she going to be able to meet the needs of her child that is not only neurodivergent and not only experienced abandonment trauma, but is also autistic, highly sensitive, and wired in this way? It's a lot for her to, it's hard for her to be the parent that I needed growing up, because she doesn't understand, and society still doesn't understand how to meet people who are neurodivergent and experience the world differently in that way. And when you start to actually see it from a spiritual lens, when you start to actually see it, you realize that the wound of conditional love, it runs through generations, but you get to be the one who breaks the cycle, not by fixing your parents, but by no longer expecting them to be who they weren't capable of being. So you start to actually understand, this is a generational thing, and it's not only about being aware of that, it's about being aware of it within yourself, and where parts and aspects of you are still craving these things externally, and it's about starting to stop seeking these things externally. It's about starting to meet those parts and aspects of yourself that need to be met by you, by your higher conscious mind, by your soul. So you need to be able to be present, and that means to put your focus and your energy into your body, into what you're experiencing through your emotional body, and looking beneath the surface, beneath what is playing out at a surface level, beneath what is projected out through those intense emotions and feelings, and through, whether it's through anger, resentment, whatever it is. It's seeing and looking at yourself beyond that, and knowing those unmet needs and things from your inner child that are underneath all of that. Before we move on to the next segment, I'll get you to reflect on this one question. Can you recall a moment where you realized your parents were operating from their own unhealed wounds? The second segment we're going to get into is the journey from resentment to forgiveness. So when you start to unpeel the emotional layers, the first thing to understand here is the body keeps the score when emotional needs go unmet. So throughout your entire life, think of every single experience you went through, particularly through childhood, when your identity is still being formed, and as a child, your awareness is almost completely inside your body, and your whole identity is being formed in the conditional environment you're in. And it's being mirrored through what your parents, your caregivers, they're projecting outwardly to you. And this is how your brain is then mapping and mirroring all of that. So, your body, your nervous system is soaking all of this up, and it's solidifying and creating an identity around all of that to not only protect you, protect your heart, and to mask and to hide those fears, those insecurities, all those things that those younger versions of you internalized, made a part of their identity, attached a meaning to, all the stories, all the things, through those needs that were unmet. So, forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about releasing the grip it has on your nervous system. So it's about looking at yourself through your nervous system, and these parts and aspects of yourself they're attached to your nervous system. Your nervous system soaked all of this up, and your brain has adapted. It's created this whole identity around those younger versions of you, and your nervous system keeps the score. It's programmed to try and cater to those unmet needs, and it's going to try and then seek that outwardly through your outer environment. And it's about starting to look at your parents beyond not only your own journey, but beyond their own journey, and looking at them just the same way as a child with unmet needs. We're all basically children on this planet with unmet needs, and we're seeking these things through our relationships subconsciously at a subconscious level, and we're attracting these things at a subconscious level. And this is what is going on. And there's a lot that we still can't see, right? Not only within ourselves, through our relationships, there's a lot of things that, we're constantly processing and working through each and every day. And, this forgiveness is something that you need to give to yourself. And so your nervous system can let go of all the things that's soaked up, all the things that, all the baggage that you've held on to, all the things you've carried generationally. It's about allowing those younger versions of you not to forget about the past, but to know and understand it doesn't mean anything about them. Those needs that were unmet, it doesn't mean anything about them. And so it's about you now reparenting them, and you giving that to yourself, and not seeking that externally, not making that mean anything about you, not receiving that in the past. So trauma often gets stored through subtle patterns, not just major events. So it's not just these major events, like I mentioned, experiencing abandonment trauma like I did as a child. We constantly attaching a meaning to every experience that we're going through each and every day, and particularly at a young age, before our identity's fully formed, we're soaking so much up, and we're still trying to know ourselves better through our external environment. And there's so much that we're attaching a meaning to unconsciously that we're not even aware of, that form most of our identity. And then as adults, we were then seeking things externally. We think we need something outside of us to fulfill these things within ourselves. But what we really need to do is expand and open up our own heart to parts and aspects of ourselves that didn't receive these things in the past. And it doesn't have to be a big, major traumatic experience for you to have affected those younger versions of you. Again, like I said, the body keeps the score. The nervous system's hardwired and has been programmed to, and your brain has adapted to the conditional environment, all the experiences and things you went through in the past. And there's so much that's underneath the surface that you're not even yet aware of. And through your relationships, through the people that are in your life, they're constantly reflecting something within yourself. And when you're triggered, when these emotions are stirred up and your nervous system is heightened, this is your body telling you this, and it's about you starting to listen to your body and to your nervous system and shift your energy outside of your own thinking brain and into your body. Because when you start to do that, you're going beyond your mind, right? And you're going beyond your own self, and you're accessing a higher part of your mind, which is beyond yourself, beyond your brain. And this is basically opening yourself up to your soul, so it can shine light on things you have not yet become aware of and know within yourself. And that's what this journey is all about. The more you connect with and be present with the more your soul can meet parts and aspects of yourself that haven't been met yet. In order to move from resentment to forgiveness, you need to reframe, things within your own experience. And that's to start to see things from a higher perspective. So your sensitivity wasn't the problem. And when it comes to your parents or your caregivers, their inability to meet you emotionally wasn't your fault. And you're not broken, you were just never fully seen. So every act of forgiveness creates space for your soul to breathe again. It's not about bypassing pain, it's about no longer letting the pain lead. Before we move on to the next segment, I'll get you to reflect on this one question. What part of yourself are you still waiting for your parents to validate? The third segment I'm going to get into is loving yourself the way you always needed to be loved. And this is just solidifying all the things that we've discussed, all the things that we moved through. And, this is so important, is to start to do this deep inner child work. And that is learning to be present with all those parts and aspects of yourself that continue to play out at a surface level, that you continue to project through at a surface level. It's about learning to look at your own experience from outside of what you're in, from outside of what is continuing to play out through you, through your relationships, when all of these emotions are stirred up, and when you're projecting from this place, when you're projecting onto others, when you're projecting a lot of anger, hurt, pain, resentment, when you're holding onto a lot of guilt and shame and all of these emotions and feelings that don't feel good. It's about learning to, using this spiritual practice of reparenting those parts and aspects of yourself that, their needs are still being unmet. And every time you project from this place, it's giving you a chance to meet them where they weren't met in the past. And that is when you're starting to build a bridge. You're starting to build a bridge from these parts and aspects of yourself that have been fragmented or separated from the wholeness of what you already are. Because you're born into a conditional environment, into this world. And younger versions of you attached something to themselves about, through their own experience, through their conditional environment, made it mean something about them when it was never about them. And it's about meeting yourself with the tenderness your inner child craved. So every time, that these parts and aspects of yourself are craving these things externally through your relationships, it's giving you a chance to give this to yourself. And, it's giving yourself permission to stop expecting emotional safety from those who couldn't even give it to themselves. And like I mentioned, it's not about what others are not giving you. It's about what you are not giving to yourself. And when I look at my own experience, this podcast, it allows me to continue healing these parts and aspects of myself. And I'm learning more about myself the more I express through doing this. This is part of my own healing, but then it's also bringing awareness to others on their own journey. And this is what I love about, doing this, because it's building that bridge to connection, to knowing and understanding parts and aspects of yourself on a more deeper level. And I know and I understand, I'm not here to blame or shame my upbringing. I'm here to free myself from the emotional weight of what wasn't mine to carry. And every time I record, I speak through the fear of being dismissed and reclaim my right to express, stutters, intensity, and all. So I'm allowing myself to meet these parts and aspects of myself through when they they're expressing their story. It's bringing up all these emotions and feelings when I express this. And it's giving me a chance to meet them. It's to finally meet them, to see and to hear them. And it's not about me seeking these things externally through others, through this podcast. It's about me seeing them, hearing them, and really acknowledging them and holding that forgiveness for what they had to go through, and not continuing to project, onto my parents, that anger, that resentment, all of those things that, were never mine to hold on to. And the more I give this to myself, the more I'm not seeking these things externally, I'm not attached to, and then it doesn't affect these versions of me any longer, because I'm meeting my own needs. And when I'm meeting my own needs, I'm healing, I'm expanding, and I'm opening up my own heart more and more and more. And I'm not only healing these parts and aspects of myself, I'm healing my body, I'm healing my nervous system, and I'm stepping into, more of I'm not only empowered, but more of a freer version of myself that can express themselves from a place of, not only feeling free, but feeling in the flow, and not feeling stagnant, not feeling stuck, and not feeling confused, and feeling more secure in my own skin. To summarize all the things I was just saying, forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a daily choice to stop projecting your unmet needs outward and start responding to them inward. Before we move on, I'll get you to reflect on this one question. What would change if you no longer waited for your parents to apologize in order to heal? We're coming to the end of today's episode, and I have a final reflection for you. Your parents might have done their best and still left you emotionally starving, but the healing isn't in rewriting the past, it's in choosing who you become from here. So the key takeaways to today's episode are: conditional love creates complex wounds, especially for neurodivergent children. Your forgiveness is not a reward to them, it's a release from you. True peace comes when you stop needing a new story and start writing your own. And reparenting is not about blame, it's about becoming the safe space you never had. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who's navigating the path of forgiving their parents. And if you're on a journey of healing through your neurodivergence, head over to innermagicacademy.com and sign up for our mailing list. You will receive weekly emails with reflections, tools, and insights on emotional healing, inner child work, and reclaiming your truth as a sensitive, soul-led being. Thanks for being here on the Inner Magic Academy podcast. The love you were waiting for begins with you. Until next time, keep showing up for the child within you. They've waited long enough. I love you. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. If you enjoyed it, we'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to our channel and give us a like or even a comment. It really does help so much in getting our work out there to the people who need it. We're so grateful for you being here, and we'll see you for the next episode.